Welcome to the Gritty Gospel Podcast, where we are unveiling the gospel truth in the grittiest moments of life. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Ian, aka EMC. I want to thank you for coming and taking some time to listen, and for those of you who are watching, to observe. This is the first episode of the Gritty Gospel Podcast. And essentially what we want to do is unveil how the gospel is effective in every single area of life. It really doesn't matter what it's all about. But we want to make sure that we do this from a perspective of compassion. Because I think this is one of the things that is missing in today's conversation, regardless of, where we stand on a certain topic or an issue. The challenge is, are we able to be empathetic to mankind? And it's very difficult right now because tensions are high. People are angry. People are desperate. People are wounded. And though this might sound like, well, isn't this how we've always been? I think it's reaching new levels. It's new pressures. And so it's important that we have truth. And so what is truth? How do we truly define that? How do we observe that it is real? And for us to talk about the gospel truth, the good news of the gospel, how do we know that this is legitimate? I mean, we have all these religions in the world. How do we know that this faith is real and different than everything else that's out there? As a Christian, as a believer in Yeshua, and a believer that Jesus did what he did on the cross, meaning that he died and he rose again for my sake, for your sake. And what that process did is basically took the wages of sin that I have in my life and basically cast that out. He paid my ransom. If the wages for sin is death, he died and then conquered death. And for me to be able to receive that free gift, in other words, I didn't ask him to do that. He did that willingly for me before my existence. To claim it, I have to basically follow him through that transition, through the death of the body to only to be resurrected in spirit. My belief was, if this is real, then there should be some breadcrumbs on earth. There should be some breadcrumbs on this planet that basically showcase this. So I really want to make sure that we take time to explore that on this podcast and really dig deep into every single area of life and prove the gospel to be true. Though all of the evidence that exists for the truth of this gospel message, the truth of what Jesus is evident. It's there. It's tangible. I know that that's not what faith is about. I mean, there's going to be forever a mystery of God because God is that grand. But there have been things that have happened in my life that I can't fully explain, things I've experienced that let me know that God is real. And those things probably weigh heavier on my belief system than any artifact that proves of the existence of Jesus walking this earth and doing what he did. Nonetheless, it's there. The evidence is there, and we look forward to exploring that. Now, the first thing I wanted to really do is kind of just set the stage. Why am I doing this when there's so many voices? Why am I doing this where you've got a lot of people who are preaching the gospel? You got a lot of people who are also talking about good things in life, and it just felt like, well, gee, how could one voice make a difference? And like I mentioned earlier, I think I see people who I agree with in the media as far as principle. But their approach is something I think is antichrist in the sense that it wouldn't be how Jesus would do it. And for me, that's important because the approach is everything. We've got to have relationships to be able to talk to people a certain way. And for example, if you got some hard truth to lay on a friend, it's much easier to lay that hard truth on a friend in a more direct manner than it is someone that you don't know. And though I'm not really afraid of dropping any hard truths, and I also understand in a platform like this, sometimes, people are going to take things however they're going to take it, no matter what your intention is and how you say it. The goal is to make sure that we follow Jesus as best we can. We follow his example as best that we can. Now, I think about this as like, why even get in a fight? Why even get in the fight? Why join the fight? And I don't know that I even necessarily, well, I'll put it this way. It's not a physical fight, right? Because every one of us is human, but we are a spiritual being having a human experience. I love that phrase. And it's the truth. This body is going to die. This body is going to decay, but your spirit doesn't. I'll never forget when I was 9 years old having a conversation with my great grandmother, Mama Emma. Can't wait to see you again. She was known for being an amazing cook, and she had the best brownies in the world, and those were my kryptonite. I remember she would, trying to keep me safe, always say, "Hey, I'm pulling these out the oven. They need to cool. Don't touch them." And I would always be impatient and get myself in trouble, and end up getting switched. Back in the old days, she would have me go out to the palm tree, pick my own switch when it was time for me to get a whooping when I did something that had crossed the line. Some of y'all youngers don't know about that, but I'll never forget it, and it made me a better person. But I digress. I asked her, I said, what is it like getting older? I'm a little kid trying to grasp life. And she looked at me and she said, well, baby, this inside, I don't feel older. I feel the same. And in my mind, I'm wiser. I know a lot more. She said, it's just this body that's changing. It can be difficult. So the spirit is eternal. And we learn in Ephesians 6:12, it says that, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Ephesians 6:12. And that really kind of sums it up, because as a believer, like, one of the things that I think is challenging for people who don't understand how we can love people of different backgrounds, different race, color, and creed, is because it's not about those things. It's about the spirit. And in that way, we are most unified. We are most the same. The skin can be different. The histories can be different. The gender can be different. The spirit is made, it's cut from the same cloth, and that is from the Creator. And so we're not looking at the outside. We're not looking at the shell. We're looking at the heart. And that's how you can find people, whether it's in China, where they're enduring great hardship and persecution, or if it's in Africa, where they're enduring some of those same things, or in South America, all the different race, colors, and creeds. You can find people whose hearts are open to the Messiah, who are open to the truth of the gospel. And in those hardships, they apply the principles that Christ laid out for us to be able to endure. So, one of the challenges that I have with even getting involved in it is, like, if there's just so much noise and so much chatter, how can we cut through? How can we do that? And then the other piece of it was, like, when you talk about speaking the truth, there's a lot of people that don't want to hear truth. There's a lot of people that are resistant to the things that God has talked about. And how do I deal with that? Like, what is even the point of trying to do that? And ironically enough, I come to Timothy, and First and Second Timothy are huge. Paul is writing to Timothy. Timothy is a Greek individual who is converted to following Christ. And I think in that realm, it has so much more relevancy, because to cut away from your culture is very difficult, and that is what following Jesus is all about, is abandoning, to a certain extent, everything that makes you feel like you, because it's fool's gold. If I identify with anything except for who Christ is, when this life is over, I'll be left with nothing, because all those things are going to fade away. Christ is eternal. And that's the importance of it. Yeah. So I'm looking at Timothy, and I'm looking at this letter that Paul wrote to him. And the first part of this section is, in this Bible, has been called Engage in Battle. Right? And why? What is the reason for engaging in the battle when it would be easier just to sit back and take care of me and mine? In 2 Timothy 1:18, Paul says, Timothy, my son, I'm giving you this instruction in keeping with the prophecies previously made about you, so that by recalling them, you may fight the good fight. I think the main thing here that I want to focus on is, again, on this first part of this, where it says, Timothy, my son, I'm giving you this instruction in keeping with the prophecies previously made about you, so that by recalling them, you may fight the good fight, having faith and good conscience. I mean, to me, that's huge, because he's saying you got to get involved. And you have to remember that this is something that was preordained. This is something that you are compelled to do. This is a responsibility that you have. And that's a very telling thing for me, because it's not so much a choice, it's a responsibility. Once we receive the good news of the gospel, we're not supposed to keep it quiet. If someone is perishing because they don't have the truth, and I have that truth, and I don't give it to them, it would be as if someone is starving in front of me, and I have food and I don't share it with them, or they're bleeding out and I have a tourniquet, but I don't apply it. And that's not what we should be doing. And another thing is, like, there's a lot of fear with it, right? What about the backlash? What about the fact that, you look all over the place, and when you try to help people, sometimes people don't even want the help. There's a lot of fear that can be created with that. There's a lot of fear in the atmosphere. But again, what does the gospel say? 2 Timothy 1:7 says, for I've not given you a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. And I think for a lot of us, we understand, or have a pretty general understanding of what power could mean in this world, what love means in this world, or I should say to this world, and that loving this world can have great impact, and that power can have a lot of hold on this world, whether it could be to hurt people or to free people. But the sound mind, I think this is one of the things that are really challenging for a lot of people right now, because it's like, what do I believe? With all the information warfare, with all the noise, how do I have peace of mind? How do I have true clarity in a world where there's so much confusion? And this is telling us that God's already given you what you need. So then the question is how do I claim it? How do I hold on to it? But we'll touch on that later. The point is that it's there. It's already part of your fabric. And really, the long and short of it is that you have to go back to the source. There really is no excuse when it comes to the mission, the commandment. And Mark 16:15, it says, and he said to them, go into all the world and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation, to the whole creation. So if I were to say, you know what, I'm just not feeling it, my goals and my aspirations are X, Y, Z. As a believer, if I'm saying to myself, this is what I choose, this is the route that I'm saying, then my leader, my savior, my master, my Lord has said, go and share the gospel. He didn't say, hey, would you think about it? He didn't say, here's a good suggestion. No, it's a clear directive. Go, do it, get it done. Now, for those who haven't accepted the call, you're not held by the same standard that those who do. So to the believer, for those who choose, a great question for us is, are we speaking up? in this time of darkness, are we speaking up? And if not, why not? And are we willing to live with the consequences, or do we really understand what the consequences are? And do we really understand what the value is, what the benefit is of being there for others, for sharing the truth, despite what anxiety and challenges it might bring? Let me find another verse that kind of speaks to this. So again, this is 1 Timothy 4, 4:15. This is really instructions for ministry. So, speaking out, sharing with the world. And this verse was powerful to me. It says, and again, 1 Timothy 4:15, practice these things, be committed to them, so that your progress may be evident to all. Pay close attention to your life and your teaching. Persevere in these things, for in doing this, you will save both yourself and your hearers. In the music industry, it's interesting to me. There's an argument or a debate going on right now about the content, especially in hip hop music. And there's this idea that is held by some of these artists that what they put in their music is separate from how they're living their lives. But I think that's a falsehood, especially because in a lot of other art forms, let's take, for example, movies, which I think also play a role in the consequence of putting out art that is damaging, which is the point that in hip hop, is often predicated that, if you are making gangster music, you're being real. It's that's your lifestyle. I'm a gangster for real. We heard it. And a lot of times, if you weren't being real in your music, then you were considered a fake. That used to hurt the credibility of your art form. And now, it's like I can say whatever in my music. I can claim to be this, I can claim to be that, and it really has no relevancy on my private life. Or if I'm doing this in my music, but I'm doing good in what I think is good anyway out there in the world, that there's no crossovers. So how can you, in one sense, so how can a rapper in one sense be pushing for prison reform, saying that there's a lot of, negativity in that space, while simultaneously creating music that is criminal in its content, talking about murder, theft, there's things in there that are literal crimes in the real world, and then seemingly have a disconnect about how a young, impressionable youth would listen to this and allow it to influence their lives, while simultaneously in your music saying, it ain't my fault I was born this way. This is the life I was born into. This is how people led me. And I'm just doing what I know. Well, now that you know better, why are you continuing it on? So what Timothy is basically saying here is that we can't really, we don't want to neglect our gifts. And in our gifts, we want to honor God with that, because God is the creator. He's the giver of our gifts. And if there's a problem with that, that's a whole nother point, I guess. But it's interesting how even in my own spirit, I've had resistance to that. And I just like, how could I, bite the hand that feeds me? It blows my mind how sometimes I'm susceptible to that. But that is the human condition. And instead, we've got to resist that and really just focus on practicing these things as far as the gifts that we've been given, being committed to them, so that our progress is evident to all, because it is not about perfection. It's about progress. And so for the believer who is contemplating these things and going, man, do I really have to get out there and speak and share this gift in such a hostile environment? Yes. But the key is that we practice, right? And a Hall of Famer, I think he's a Hall of Famer, but one of our local broadcasters, football, the Broncos are currently on a big streak right now after having a dismal first part of the season. But he said something last night that really stuck with me. And he says, essentially, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but what he's saying here is, what you do most, you'll do best. So practice. And we're out of practice. We're out of practice with our sword, right? If the Bible, if the scriptures are the sword of the Spirit, are the offensive weapon as well as a defensive weapon, you've got to practice it. We've got to practice speaking it. And a lot of times we're too scared to speak up. But we have to remember that we don't have a spirit of fear. We have to lean on the source. And when we're connected to the source, then we've got to practice. We got to use practice, and we got to be committed so that the progress is evident to all, because it isn't about where we are, it's about where we're going. And so when people can see that over time, that's a big part of it. But in order for them to see it over time, that also implies that there is a relationship, that this isn't a one-stop shop, that it comes over time. So it says to pay attention to our lives and our teaching. Persevere in these things when it gets difficult. And persevere means that there's going to be implies that there's challenge. For in doing this, we will save not just ourselves, but the people who listen to us. So it is clearly showing that what we utter out of our mouths, the truth or the lies that we utter out of our mouths, impact those who are listening and who are following. So to me, this was an encouragement, It was an encouragement because it's the blueprint. These questions that I have about what would be the value of speaking up and speaking out and sharing the things that I believe and I know in my soul. This is one of them, that the listener, that whoever you are, might be encouraged as I'm encouraged to be able to go out and live the great adventure of life. Because it isn't really worth much if we aren't doing something of value with it. It reminds me of a quote by Hunter S. Thompson. Who is the happier man? He who has braved the storm of life and lived, or he who has stayed securely on the shore and merely existed? This hits home. Because I think at this point of our lives, it's really easy to be lost in the virtual world. And I don't know if you're like me, but there's been often times where I'm feeling like I need to be working on my purpose. I need to be working on my goals and my mission, but I'm scared for whatever reason that this ain't gonna work out the way that I want it to. So what do? I just pass some time. I'm flipping. I'm scrolling. I'm just killing time. I'm staying distracted. We got an endless web, and truly an endless web that we could just be lost in for hours. It's like the new lotus flower in Greek mythology, where one bite would make the sailors think that they were spending just a couple hours when in reality it was years, decades of their life were going by until that's it. You're dead. You're gone, and you've missed it. Can't sit on the sidelines anymore. There is a war of good and evil that has always existed, and we are at a precipice. We are at a moment in time where those who have the light need to speak up, need to share it with love, compassion, and with perseverance, with resiliency. Matthew 28:18-20 should be, and really is to me, one of the greatest encouragements for my life. And Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. This is important to me because we all need backup. And for those of you who have been in the good fight and who have been sharing the gospel truthfully and honestly with the world, and who sometimes feel like, man, this can sometimes feel like a losing battle, the creator of the universe, who is undefeated, has declared that he's got your back. If God be for us, who can be against us? Well, the answer to that is no one. And hopefully, like you've inspired me, some of you great influencers, preachers, artists, creatives, business people who have been doing their best to glorify God with their gifts and with their talents, and have been doing so boldly, with perseverance, with endurance. I want you to know that even though some of us are arriving to the party a little bit late, we hear you, we've heard you, and there's an awakening that's happening. There's awakening that's happening. And now it's time to stand up, speak up, and be accounted for. So this is going to wrap this episode. Again, I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for participating. Please like this, share this, save it, download it. Oh, you know the thing. I'm not going to start clowning on nobody, but I always found that just to be hilarious. You know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. But anyway, again, my name is Ian, aka EMC Music, and this is the Gritty Gospel